Welcome. So I'm Ted Ruger. I'm the Dean of the Penn Carey Law School for about 2 more weeks after at the end of an 8-year term, and then I'm going to return to the faculty here. So it's this may be the last time I wear a suit for my official duties, and it is a great, I will say, and even the weather cooperated, it's not too hot. It is a great pleasure to be here welcoming you to our law school in person, and welcome as well to the remote viewers. But I think we're back to the world of a majority in-person conference, which was great. It's so lovely to come in. Yes. Coming in and seeing many of you enjoying the courtyard and reconnecting and meeting each other. I think that John Mayer, who I'll hand over to in a minute with appreciation, mentioned there's maybe 140 different institutions or something like that represented here. So welcome, and again, my main role is just to enthusiastically welcome you. Others will follow me who are much more well-versed in the substance, and it's a really rich and important set of panels. This conference, as with past iterations, although there's kind of maybe a sharper edge with all of the discussion of evolving artificial intelligence and such, but the major themes remain the same. It's kind of thinking about technological advancements in our field, and how those advancements can be sort of harnessed and captured and perhaps regulated to serve much older ends that librarians and law schools and technologists have worked on for really centuries, is the challenge of kind of melding new technologies in a way that reduces inequality rather than exacerbates inequality. And I think I was on a conference call board meeting with an institution that many of you know and some of you work in, our Future the Profession initiative here, which does look at technology and technological changes, but also is focused on the ways in which technology might reduce inequality in access to legal services rather than exacerbate it. And in some sense, I feel like we're hearing a lot these weeks and months recently about the kind of apocalyptic risks of artificial intelligence, sort of Terminator stuff, and maybe that's, well, I think that's real, although I think it's there's time to respond if we're shrewd about it. I actually think the medium-term risk that could happen in a few years, it may already be happening in a few months, is the risk of exacerbating inequalities in access to knowledge, in the ability to kind of tap into the power of new technologies, and we've seen that in past cycles, and sort of law schools and law libraries and libraries generally have through history, I would say, served. You can identify certain periods in world history where libraries have centralized and kind of cabined off knowledge, but of course then you could think of lots of times in the last decades and century where law libraries generally, law schools have served to disseminate knowledge and reduce the cost of knowledge, reduce the barriers to access. And so I feel like that's a theme that all of us who are excited about the use of technology in what we do should kind of keep in mind, especially at a sort of well-resourced institution like this one. What are we doing to use the technology to train lawyers, to support lawyers who go into fields that help reduce the growing inequalities in society on both income and access to information? And so with that, it's a really rich, substantive discussion today and tomorrow, and I hope you enjoy our campus. I hope you enjoy Philadelphia, and I'll turn it over with gratitude for his leadership to John Mayer. Thank you, John.
Use that. All right, you all got a piece of paper. This is a little homework before we start. I'm going to click that off so you can read that. I want you to write your email address on it and write 3 words about law in 2035. In the year 2035. Either 3 words or a phrase or a sentence. I'm not going to be too picky. And then I want you to make a paper airplane out of it or a meteor. which is to say just crumple it up and hang on to it, all right? So just 3 words, email address, something about law 10 years from now. And then hang on to that, all right. What? Should I use the clicker? I should use the clicker. I should use the clicker. There we go. Oops. All right, let's get started. Hi, everybody. My name is John Mayer, and I'm the Executive Director of CALI, the Center for Computer Assisted Legal Instruction. Welcome to the 33rd Calicon. Our theme is Forging the Future of Legal Education, and we really should have made the theme AI. What else are you going to talk about? Because that does seem to be the deal. Now, I've given this welcome a bunch of times, but I got to admit, I was completely out of ideas in preparing for this. And so I did what all your students are going to be doing now and into the future, and what everybody's going to do when they're stuck for ideas and want somebody else to do their work for them. I went to ChatGPT. So, I said to ChatGPT, write a short welcome to a conference about legal education and technology attended by law professors, law librarians and technoids, and technical staff. And it did not disappoint. Dear esteemed attendees, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our conference on legal education and technology. We are delighted to bring together law professors, law librarians, technoids, and technical staff to explore the latest developments in the intersection of technology and legal education. Okay, this is a little dry. I need something with more punch, so I asked it to make it shorter and more awesome. Did not disappoint. Distinguished attendees, welcome to our epoch-making conference where legal education and technology converge in a harmonious symphony of intellectual grandeur. Prepare for the transformative sessions and visionary discourse as we navigate uncharted realms. There we are. Uncharted realms of innovation. Embrace this utopia where academia and technology intertwine. Welcome to the future of legal enlightenment. I'm sold. That worked really well. But I kind of wanted something a little bit more classic. So I said, same thing, but as a Shakespearean sonnet. So. Hark! Welcome to this grand conference hall, where legal minds and tech do interlace, with law professors, librarians all, and technoids and staff of technical grace. Oh, how the legal landscape does evolve, and technology a vital role does play. To keep in step, we must our minds resolve, to learn, to grow, and new ideas display. So let us gather, listen, and share our views, and keep our legal education anew. That's pretty good. But, that's classic, but it's kind of boring for, the youngsters. And there's a lot of brand new... Actually, I meant to ask, how many people are here at the conference for the first time? That's like a little bit over a third. All right. So this is my opportunity to say this is not like other conferences. I'll take off my Shakespeare hat now. It's not like other conferences. And for the duration of this conference, because you might be a nerd and might be an introvert, I give you permission to join conversations without having to ask permission or say, I'm sorry. Can I join this conversation? All right? You can just go up to people and say, hi, John said it was all right to have a conversation with you. And it will be perfectly fine for the next couple of days. All right. So, okay, Shakespeare was classic, but, like I said, it doesn't fit this generation. So I thought, same thing as an Eminem rap song. All right. Here we go. I'm not going to do rap. All right. But I love this outro. I mean, you just got to read this and appreciate this. It's really good. So, anyhow, I'm going back to the classics, something that we can all participate in. So I asked it to do the same thing as a lyrics to the tune of Jingle Bells, and I prepared for it and grew the beard. All right, so everybody join in. This is a little hard because the syllables are a little funny. So here we go. It's dashing through the snow, remember? So here we go. AI-powered research tools guide us through the law. Virtual reality simulations make learning not a bore. Online legal clinics extend access far and wide. We're revolutioning education with technology as our guide. Hey, legal ed tech, join the conference, let's connect. Learning, sharing, minds ablaze, innovating, shaping future ways. Oh, legal ed and tech, synergy will be perfect. Oh, what fun it is to learn in this conference we discern. Hey! This is our future of AI. So finally I decided, calm it down, slow it down, make it really short, and let's do a haiku. All right, good. Legal and tech meet, minds unite to learn and grow. New ideas take flight. So Cali staff, I'd like you all to get your cameras out and prepare to take a picture. I'll give you a moment for that, of the room. And I want everybody to throw your airplane or meteor sort of towards inwards to the whole thing. On 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Woo! A couple of late ones there. And you folks online, if you're at home, just throw it across the room and go pick it up again. All right, so what I want all of you to do now is, as we leave the auditorium when we're done with the plenary, is to pick one up. And then in a week, I want you to email the person whose name is written on there and tell them what you think about their prediction for 2035. Now be nice, don't be a troll, all right? All right. Good. So welcome to Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. It's a good thing we're here to bring joy to this city because they've had some rough times. They lost the World Series last year, they lost the Super Bowl last year. They lost I-95 last week. And their most famous statue in the city is of a fictional sports character. Sorry, Philadelphia. So the conference started out as the Conference for Law School Computing Professionals. Professionals. And here it is today, 33 years later. It was started by Tom Bruce and Tom Bruce, as you can see in that picture. Actually, I'm catching up to you, Tom, with the magnificent beard. We lived through COVID in the last couple of years and put it into our rear view mirror. And here we are today, 33 years later, forging the future of legal education. I want to thank Penn Carey Law and the Dean. Thank you for having us. We like to go around and visit places that we've never seen before. You know, although Philadelphia is not a place that people don't visit. It's a great city for walking around and seeing the history of our nation. I want to thank our sponsors for helping us out because without them we couldn't do some of the things that we do for this conference. I want to thank my board of directors, many of them who are here. Hi, board. Raise your hand if you're on the Cali board. There's a couple. There we are. Very good. They are volunteers. They don't get paid. And I wanted to point out that there's like almost half of the people, at least by our, and this could include you, some of you folks who are online, are first-time attendees. And then even with that, like 75 to 80% are first time to 5 conferences. Let's do that. So we asked who was a first-time attendee, who's a 2 through 5 year attendee. Not bad. Who's a 6 through 10 year attendee? Not bad. And then who's a 11 through 32 year attendee? There's a bunch of you. And who's the 33 year attendee? I'm sorry, I had to do that. All right, got some housekeeping. There are tours, but not today. There is not a library tour today.
Tomorrow's library tour.
Tomorrow's the library tour at 12:30, meeting right at the law library, but there are tech tours both today and tomorrow at 12:30, and meet right at the reception desk where you got your name badges, right? There's a raffle on Friday, and it's a bribe, right? We want you to go around and visit the vendors, and you get a sticker from them, and if you get 3 stickers, then you put it on the piece of paper and you stick it in a box. But these are the things we're raffling off. A Star Wars clock, a shape-shifting box, a geek multi-tool, a telescoping magnet pick-up tool. Don't get too excited. Calm down. A couple of nerdy lawyer keyboards and a 3D printer. And tactical sporks. I make no assertions as to whether you're going to get them through TSA. And a whole bunch of gift cards courtesy of the free law folks. Thank you so much, Tim. So remember, you got to get stickers by visiting the sponsors at their tables and putting them in the registration box by 4 p.m. on Friday. That's tomorrow. And you got to get at least 3. Right? I wasn't sure what the number was when I wrote that. All right, at the reception tonight, we got, I think it's beer and wine and some schnackies, and we got a couple of walk-around musicians. Steve Friedberg and Randy Shine are coming to entertain us. And Steve said he's even willing to teach some of you some magic tricks, which I thought is awesome. So that's it. That's our conference. I hope you guys have a good time. Now I want to introduce Pablo Arredondo is the co-founder and chief innovation officer of Casetext. I found Pablo because I was looking for somebody who wasn't saying absolute crap about AI. And I listened to a few of his online things, and he sounded like an intelligent person who could bring some sense to this overhyped space. So Pablo? And I will... beginning.
All right. Thank you so much. What a privilege to get to do this opening keynote at a very exciting time for law. Thank you to our hosts and our sponsors. Penn's actually dear to my heart. 23 years ago, as a research assistant at Penn Center for Bioethics, we were tasked with writing a code of ethics for genetic engineering. And we had these stakeholder dialogues. On one side of the table was Monsanto and DuPont and Dow. And on the other was NGOs with names like Friends of the Earth and things like that. And my job was to throw little apples of discord out. Like, when do you guys think of Twinkies? And they fight about Twinkies. I mean, they fight about everything. Okay. So anyway, so Penn has a very special place in my heart. Okay, let's dive in. So normally I'll say I'll give $200 to anybody who can tell me who this is, but this crowd, you guys, I'm going to be surprised if somebody does know, so I'm going to lower it to $100. Who's this? Nope. Nope. Yeah. So this is the guy that everyone should know about, but nobody does. He's a really fascinating guy. This is a guy named Walter Pitts, born in Detroit, I think in the 20s, to a pretty rough family, uneducated family. But he was a prodigy. And the story goes, he was running away from some bullies into the library, and he had to kill some time. I guess they waited outside for him. So he read the latest work from Bertrand Russell. This is a 12-year-old, mind you. And he wrote Bertrand Russell being like, this is the thing I don't think you got right. And Bertrand Russell was so impressed that he wrote him and said, you should come join me here at Oxford. And he did not do that. But at 15, he ran away from home, never to be seen at home again. And surfaces, I kid you not, he's homeless in Chicago, and he barges into the U Chicago to a math professor and starts telling him all the things he did wrong in his recent work. And I think once you get to a certain IQ, just game recognized game, right? Like the professor could this guy, right? So he went in the streets and found him and said, stop being homeless. Come, be an academic. It pays a little bit better, right? And it's a good thing that he did, because Walter Pitts then went on to do a very kind of crazy career, become the first guy to map out a neuron mathematically. Right? They were just starting to understand the brain. And this is in, like, I think 1948. He teamed up with a psychiatrist named McCullough, but I think he's that guy's boring. I don't like to talk about him as much. So, and then just fun fact, Walter Pitts, during the draft of World War II, he was labeled as pre-psychotic. And so you think, well, okay, that's the end of that. No, they sent him down to the Manhattan Project because, of course, that's where somebody who's pre-psychotic. So this is Walter Pitts, fantastic guy, sort of the real Good Will Hunting in a way, right? I mean, the homeless guy running in and all this stuff. And he, honestly, I think, deserves to be much more famous. I hope they make a movie for him. Sort of a shadowy character in some ways, and there's a bunch of stuff there. But anyway, all right. So a few years after he puts out this paper, the term artificial intelligence was coined in a proposal to Dartmouth in 1955. They were going to solve it all in one summer. That was the idea. And they said, okay, we're going to fix everything. And from the beginning, language, this is the actual proposal they had. And from the beginning, language was on the agenda. We have to figure out language. That was from the moments you had the first phrase of artificial intelligence, language was part of the deal. And from the earliest days of AI, there were these kind of two major schools of thought. Okay, so the thing is, how do we make something smart? And one school of thought said, well, I'm smart. We're smart. We know how to think about things. So let's just write down how to think about things and code that into the computer. And this is called the expert systems or symbolic. There's different ways of doing it. But the idea is you just think it through, you map it out, and you code it into the computer. But from the earliest days, there was this other school of thought that said, hold on. What's actually smart in this world? It's this weird thing. And I don't see any flowcharts on this. And I don't see any recipes on this. What I see here is this immense constellation of neurons, all connected to each other, that have been manicured over time through experience to somehow code and capture something intelligent. And so if you want to make something smart, we should do what the smart thing does. And this is the neural net school, connect, as the other term for it. And they had a really rough go, those guys. And part of the problem, apparently the biggest problem, was computers weren't very good in the late 50s and early 60s, relatively speaking. And these guys were laughed out of the room. They were told, you're wasting your career. By very smart people, they were told, you're wasting your career. This is a guy, Frank Rosenblatt at Cornell, doing his best to try to make a neural network with a computer that was probably the size of this auditorium and less powerful than like a 1980s, Casio 1. So before this next slide, take a second. Can we all agree that getting to say I told you so is one of the great joys of life? I mean, come on, right? Something happens, and 2 weeks later you get to tell a colleague I told you so. It's just sublime. But this is the face of like a 30-year I told you so. This is Jeff Hinton, one of the godfathers, they say, of AI, one of the guys who stuck with it through the winter, through the mockery, etc. You've seen him in the news a lot more because he just left Google, and he's been talking a lot more about some of the deeper ethical implications. But he, among others, really stuck with it. And what changed was not so much the underlying theories, although there were certainly some advancements there, but the computational power to actually test them and execute on them. And that's really what's been driving this. I'm going to take two examples that are dear to my heart, or kind of, that I choose. There's many others you can use. But what a revolution these neural nets are causing, right? So here, chess, all the AI guys are chess nerds. I'm a chess enthusiast. I don't know if I'm good enough to be a nerd yet. Playing black in this chess game is the culmination of centuries of humans playing chess with each other across our continents and thinking about how do we master this game, and decades of computer scientists working with those chess masters to best encode systems. So basically, black is the culmination of all of human effort across all of the manual chess we played and the computer science. And some of you probably already know who's playing white. AlphaZero, a neural net that taught itself to play chess in 4 hours by playing itself and paying attention to what happens. And when it came out, the chess master said, this thing plays like an alien. It plays like it's from another dimension because it had not been biased by our games. It wasn't taught by us how to play chess. It taught itself. Another fantastic example is protein folding, right? So if you have this string of amino acids, what actual shape is that protein going to take? That is one of the, or was, I should say, one of the hardest challenges in biochemistry. You can get a PhD just trying to map out one substructure of a protein. This is hemoglobin for all of you. I'm sure dying of curiosity to know which one I chose. And instead, these neural nets basically solved protein structure for all amino acids. Right? So just absolutely fantastic developments. All of which, as Greg Brockman, the president of OpenAI, tweeted, I think late last year, all of it going back to our friend Walter Pitts. Teenage Runaway. Okay. All right. But of course, chess and proteins, that's all well and good. Self-driving cars are great. Facial recognition is great. But ours is a castle built of language, right? And for various reasons, it was harder to apply this stuff to language than to other areas at first. And the real breakthroughs that have been driving all of this have been the sort of marriage of these neural net approaches with natural language processing. And so we're going to go on a little journey real quick about that, because I think you have to do that. You have to understand at the core sort of just basically what's going on with these things to kind of put all the rest in context. But get ready, because it's going to be a journey. I'll start by just showing you the old way, and by the old way I mean what most of the tech we're using even today uses. The old way of doing language was you take all your words and you shove them in a spreadsheet, and then you take all your documents and they all get a column, and either the word's in there or it's not. I'm simplifying a bit. This was revolutionary when it happened, right? This allowed keyword search. You could search through 1 million documents for the word you wanted, but of course you were at the mercy of having to choose the right document, right? This is basically the paradigm that was governing up until very recently. Okay, so what's different? What's now? Well, here we go. Get ready. So first, I need you guys to allow yourselves to enter a space that has hundreds of dimensions. Now, this is not a picture of that. This is just a weird thing I'm putting up while we talk about what we can't really visualize, right? Some people say, oh, just shut up about the dimensions. It never goes well. No one ever understands the dimension talk. You know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it here. It's Keynote, right? You can't visualize hundreds of dimensions, but you can say to yourself, man, I have a healthy respect for dimensions. Because you can imagine, for instance, a dating site that only had eye color. And then you're like, well, that's the one. Okay. And then they add like hobbies or interests, all these different dimensions. And each of these dimensions can capture this thing where you're like, oh, thank God for those other dimensions, right? It's a somewhat crude analogy. So all I'm going to say here is we're in a space now with hundreds of dimensions. You can't really visualize it, but kind of keep in mind that each of these dimensions can kind of store something, can kind of hold something, can be something where you can adjust things. Okay. So now we're going to take our words, as though this wasn't weird enough, and instead of just putting them into a flat spreadsheet, we're going to assign each one a random vector. A vector is a direction and a magnitude. You can think like high school physics, you hit the ball and it goes like that, right? So the cat, I'm just giving it this random one. But remember, this is a fancy arrow that's pointing in hundreds of dimensions at once. That's the part we can't really see. So we've got our fancy arrow. So every one of our words, we give a fancy arrow. And then we spin them random, so it's completely random. And now we have 30,000 random fancy arrows, which is neat, but not that useful, right? So the question now is, how do you go from random, from this to something useful? And believe it or not, the whole journey really starts, I shouldn't just say start, the bulk of the journey is this very simple game. And I'm going to ask for some audience participation here. The senator could not decide which way to. I do it in Chicago and it's flea market, but you know. Right. The senator could not decide which way to vote. Now, all of you arrived at the same answer there. Nobody said which way to roller coaster, right, or which way to rhinoceros, right? Because what you did, without even thinking about it, was look at all these words. Think not just what do these words mean individually, but what do these words mean in this specific order. And then of all these words, which one is most useful for predicting the right word, right? Because if I swap out senator, you would change your answer. But if I swap out decide and just choose, you win it, right? Okay. So believe it or not, for reasons we don't fully understand, if you take a neural net and you make it play this guessing game a lot, truly extraordinary things happen. And that process starts random, right? So it says the senator could not decide which way to elephant. So I got it, that's my answer. How'd I do? And then it says, oh, I was pretty bad. But then it says, you know, if I took my fancy arrow for the word senator, and on dimension 111, I gave it a little pull this way. And I took my fancy arrow for the word vote, and on dimension 619, I went a little bit that way, I would have been less terrible. And that's what it is. It's this neural net trying to be as good as it can at guessing the next word. And one of the key differences is that unlike earlier AI that required these manual steps where humans had to go label 50 things, I'm sure many folks in this room have been involved in projects like that, this is what they call self-supervised. The system can just play the game itself. And I think that's really important because that's what allows you to scale up. And so you guys are going to have to watch this analogy to really instill what it means to be self-supervised. The dog has the laziest owner in the world. He won't play catch. Really? All right, fine. All right. I sometimes wonder how long could I play that video before John would pull me off stage. But the point is, right, so the point is that that dog can play catch as long as he wants, right? And that's the thing is that that's really what enables us to do these large training systems is that you're not having manual labeling, right? You just feed in data. And what happens if you do that game enough? Massively expensive. It's expensive for computation, it's expensive for the environment, it's expensive for money, it's expensive in every single way something can be expensive, basically. But what happens is all of our arrows, go from random to trained. I never use these little effects except for here. I was like, you know what, this one's working great. Now suddenly, instead of this randomness, we have a language model. And if you do it with enough data, if you do it with billions of parameters and oceans of training data, well, then you get a large language model. And here we are. That's what this is all about. So this is just one graph showing kind of the evolution of it. I just want to take a moment to talk about BERT for a second. So these large language models are all the rage right now, but it's actually about 5 years that they've been out. And BERT was was the first kind of major one. BERT is where my startup Casetext started getting involved with these large language models. And it started, I think I have this next slide right. It started in the context of a citator. So Casetext, one of the things we're trying to do is create, affordable, quality legal research tools. And you can't do legal research, of course, without knowing if a case has been overruled or not, right? This is, basic stuff. But the problem is sometimes the judge will say, we overruled Jenkins. Great, thank you. Very easy to parse out, right? Sometimes it will say, we regretfully consign Jenkins to the dustbin of oblivion. How do you catch that? You're going to have to read everything, right? The first flickers I saw of these large language models was about 5 years ago when I saw this output and I was like, wait, it knows that means overrule? Because that is not how you would normally say it. That was the first sort of sense of it, right? And so then we folded that in, and suddenly now we were able to, with a smaller team, to do a really good citator because we're now able to kind of get past this like literal keyword and start to get into meaning. We then also, so then we trained our own system. Remember that guessing game? We made it play that guessing game, but with the US common law. Put the entire common law through. And that led to something called parallel search. I always wish I could get that edit button back because it starts, if you were litigator. And it's just, like, I'm so proud. This is such a proud defining moment when I got to introduce neural net information retrieval. If you were litigator. Your life is full of disappointment. Okay, so what we did release something called parallel search. This let you search with a complete sentence. And you were no longer at the mercy of your keyword, right? You could search exactly what you want, and it would go find it, even if the articulation was completely different, because these specific words have never really mattered. What's always mattered is the substance of what you're saying. For the first time, thanks to these earlier language models, we were able to use that in the search and to create that. And it was very well received, and so then that led to something called all search. I don't think I have any glaring type of this one, but basically they said now we want to point neural net search at depositions and at e-discovery, et cetera, right? So these language models have actually been doing a lot of things before the ChatGPT. And then finally, here's me, I think in August of last year, screaming to everyone, get excited about neural nets. Oh my God, this is so cool. And then this represents the crickets and the tumbleweed. But then, okay, now people are, okay. So then ChatGPT came out, as you guys well know. And what ChatGPT is, and I think there's something a little confusing about this. ChatGPT is the earlier model that they actually built in 2020 called GPT-3 with these spices on, and I'll get into one of these spices in a second, right? So it came out late last year, but it's actually built on something that was much earlier. And in fact, if you read about the internal discussions at OpenAI, a lot of them were like, why would we put this out? It's not that exciting. It's just the old model, right? I know. Good call. It's that I told you so thing. Somebody gets to say, I told you so at OpenAI. But the thing that they added, I think, that helped a lot, this instruct GPT and then this RLHF, that stands for reinforcement learning from human feedback. This is something that happens after the training, after that guessing game, and this is a bit more traditional. This is like a human sits down and helps kind of guide things. And so the way it works is a human will sit down, ask the input, get 4 different potential answers, and then decide which one they like. And then they know how to, they figured out how you can amplify that input and kind of make things better, right? So you tend to do it for just kind of don't be mean, and then also safety, right? You don't want it to do things like that. Okay, so that's what ChatGPT was, and it caused a lot of excitement. I think for the first time, people were starting to see like, oh my God, these language models and what they're capable of. And they said when they released it, don't use this for anything important. But not everyone got that memo. And, sorry. Not everyone got that memo. We're going to kind of circle back to it, right? What had happened, though, earlier for us, for Casetext, is we were shown GPT-4 early. Now, GPT-4 is the new state-of-the-art model. GPT-4 is the one that can pass the bar exam. And that's a majority of test takers that are humans. Which majority is the subject of some debate right now? Is it the vast majority, or is it just a substantial majority? I don't think much turns on that, to be perfectly honest, right? But this GPT-4 is just this is not built on GPT-3, if that makes sense. GPT-4 is a new model, one that was trained using the new thing. What was it precisely trained on? We don't know. Even their close partners like us, they don't tell. Apparently the EU might force them to if they want to do business there, so that's, like, as of today, that regulation proposal just came out. But GPT-4 is what we saw, Jake and I, and when we saw it, we literally pivoted the entire company. Pencils down on everything you're doing. And I will say that most of the work I've done over the last 10 years is completely obsolete. And if you're sincere in this world, that should be a cause of joy. You should be like, good. Things are going to be way better than all of the stuff that I built with these clumsy techniques, right? But when we saw it, we realized that we had not just kind of crept past an inflection point, but leapt over it. And with these models, like humans, we're used to kind of linear growth with things. But these neural nets kind of jump in these like quanta. So like suddenly it's way better than before, right? All right, let's see, what have I got? Okay. So, and I'm trying to get artsy here, and let's see how let's succeed. Now we're going to go all the way back to 1973, when this article, I think this is the first issue of the Hofstra Law Review that ever came out. And there was an article called Computers and the Legal Profession. And Professor Garland, in this article, talks about Isaac Asimov, and how Isaac Asimov had written an article 5 years earlier called Who's Afraid of Computers? And what Isaac Asimov talked about there was this guy Kepler. And he said, for the first time in history, the solar system was correctly described. But in order to work out those laws, Kepler had to spend years of calculations in an attempt to find out how to relate all those observations. It is tragic that Kepler had to waste years on such stultifying labor. I kind of wish we had Larry David here to do like a, won't someone think of Kepler? Like Kepler? Anyway, so, the sort of sense there early on, and this is like, it's like kind of half a century ago, right? This debate about what role is technology going to have, what role are computers going to have, will they free us up to do better things, et cetera, this has been discussed. This is not that new, despite the fact that it's now perhaps more pertinent, I guess, because of the increasing in AI. So I thought this was all I was going to have on Kepler, but then 2 days ago, a guy, David Deutsch at Oxford, tweeted this out, and I was like, I don't want to include this too because I feel like it's related. Forgive the wall of text here, but what he says is, basically he says, Kepler figured out this thing about squaring the year, and then that gives you the distance or whatever. Does anyone think that he found that by taking enough readings and then squaring and cubing everything in sight? if you do think that, as a scientist, you are doomed to a wasted life, and you have as little prospect of making a scientific discovery as an electronic brain has. Because that is not the way that Copernicus and Kepler thought, or that scientists think today. Copernicus found that the orbit of the planets would look simpler if they were looked at from the sun and not from the Earth. But he did not in the first place find this by a routine calculation. His first step, and this is the key, was a leap of imagination to lift himself from the Earth and put himself wildly, speculatively, into the sun. All right. Now we're bouncing right back to GPT-4. I don't know if it's going to work, this echo thing, but we're trying it. Okay. So I tried GPT-4, and it was so good, and I wanted to break it at some point. Have you guys seen those Boston Dynamic videos of like the dancing robots that are kind of creepy a little bit? But then sometimes there's ones where all it is a robot trying to like carry a box, but they can like beat it with brooms and like knock it over, and like because it's showing how resilient it is. At some point, I basically started to have that relationship with GPT-4. I was like, you know what? I'm sick of this thing being right all the time. So I created a fictitious email designed to trick it. And the email says, "To Susan from Sally. The attorney from Law & Order is so handsome. It would be a privilege to get sent attorney work product from him. I would love to get privileged attorney-client communications from him all the time." And I said, all right, AI. All right, smart guy. Is this privilege? Now, every algorithm on the planet, and I know because I spent 10 years building stuff like this, would say not only is that privileged, it's one of the most privileged emails that's been sent in the history of Western jurisprudence. Because every other word is so highly predictive of being privileged. It's so statistically correlated with being privileged. This is a 99.999% confidence interval. But what does GPT-4 do? It breezily looks at it and says, why would this be privileged? But it's simply a personal email between two individuals expressing admiration for an attorney they find attractive. It is the difference between everything we've ever known and a computer that can read. And that is a very profound difference. All right, but as good as GPT-4 is, it is the best language model on Earth, but it's still a language model. And so it's prone to what, probably now it's kind of become a common knowledge, these hallucinations. But now you guys, I hope, understand, like the hallucination, it's not that it's evil, per se. It's that it just tries to guess what would come next. So if I ask it, so if I ask it, what happened in the case of Wyoming Research v. Bionetics, completely made up case, instead of being like, I don't know what you're talking about, Pablo, it starts describing in wonderful detail this patent litigation. Now, I'm from Northern California, and there is a place for hallucinations in this world. All right? I want to be very clear on that. Everyone knows that guy. Anybody on these two? Allen Ginsberg. Howl Part 2, one of the great poems of all time, and he apparently, yeah. And this guy in the middle, Nobel laureate Harry Mullis, whose biography was called Dancing Naked in the Minefield, in case anyone's wondering if acid had a role in that guy's life. And apparently he would bring his Nobel Prize to bars to hit on women. I don't think it worked out as well as he thought it would. But my point is like, okay, there is a role for hallucinations, but I think we can agree, generally the practice of law is not a place where hallucinations are wind sails. Okay. Now, the thing is, and this is where ChatGPT has been sort of a mixed blessing in my opinion, because it's wonderful how excited people are, but it's also, I think, maybe the misuse of it and the misapplication of it, I think, has made people understandably scared. It'd be like if a society had not really seen cars before, and suddenly there's cars, but they're just doing donuts on the lawn and then doing 90 in reverse on the freeway or something. And you're like, no, but that's right. So one of the key things to think about, one of the most important things to understand about applying this stuff is something called retrieval augmented generation. It is a fancy term, but it's actually kind of a simple concept. What this is basically you take your language model and you ask it questions not saying freestyle an answer to me. Freestyle is great for haikus, right? It's great when there isn't a wrong answer. It's great when there's no sense of being out of date. But that's really not what lawyers are doing most of the time. They need correct substantive answers. And so what retrieval augmented generation does is basically the human says, I want blah, blah, blah. The AI then says, if that's what you want, here's 12 search queries that a human would run to go find relevant information. I'll go run that, and then I'll synthesize the actual content that I get back. So you're anchoring the language model in truth. And this you don't want to ever say something definitively, but we've now had a system like this out. It's being used by thousands of attorneys, and we're not seeing hallucinations, right? And we added safeguards on top of that to like police for them. But this is it's a really important thing to understand, because I don't know what role just pure ChatGPT is going to play in law. But I'm pretty sure it's going to pale in comparison to the role of systems that combine the power of a model like GPT-4 with truth, with like a real database of transcripts, emails, whatever you want. So I won't belabor Casetext on it, but we've been doing things now. We've been working with firms. This is actually from the transactional context, which is not my major area, but you can have the AI review thousands of contracts and answer a bunch of questions, right? It can do legal research. I don't know if I have that. I don't have that slide. It's all right. The fact that it can do legal research, and by that what I mean is you give it whatever you want, it creates a bunch of search queries, we feed it back 500 results, and it synthesizes an answer based on, and critically only on, those results. And to me, it wasn't the bar exam. The bar exam is cool. It's a marketing gimmick. It's when law librarians came back and said, this is solid. That is the most gushing praise I've ever heard from a law librarian about anything. And to hear it about an AI that purports to write legal memos, I mean, come on, this thing, So I think that, to my mind, the legal research is one of the examples now, really seeing what happens, just how nuanced this thing is. It's really able to deliver answers. But everything we do, and now I'm kind of kicking myself, because I deleted a bunch of Casetext slides, because I don't want this to be, like a Casetext show thing. But I screwed up. I deleted the wrong one, I think. But anyway, everything we do in the product has a trust but verify. Like, remember Reagan and the Soviets and all that stuff? It's so important to understand that this is not a replacement for lawyers, and I have some stuff on that later, right? This is a tool that can supplement attorneys, but it is critical that the attorney always be providing oversight. And so everything we do, we don't just give an answer, we give an answer, and then underneath is, this is the case, and underneath that is, this is the exact language, right, that we're relying on for this system. And so in terms of education, I think that's just going to be something really important to explain to the folks, is that you are still in charge. This is not the AI robot lawyer does it and you print it and hand to your client, right? It's not there, and I don't think it'll be there for some time. All right, where are we going next? Okay. So we've been using this for things like doc review. We've been working with attorneys at Cravath, Swaine & Moore, and we're seeing increased recall, meaning we're finding more docs. And finding things in a day instead of 3 weeks, right? I mean, it's pretty powerful once you start applying this. And you're going to hear this revolution called, I think it's, at this point it's pretty much locked, right? Generative AI, that's what we're calling it. But I submit to you guys that the fact that AI can generate text is actually not the most exciting thing for lawyers and for legal professionals. It's the fact that AI can read text and summarize it and analyze it and translate it and categorize it and synthesize it. This, to my mind, is really what's going to be driving the bulk of like the progress right now. Now, look, is it cool that it can spit out a depot outline and generate text? Yeah, that's lovely as well. But again, I think it's important to understand that it's not about just outputting stuff. It's about the fact that you can point this at a large litigation record and say, show me instances where someone was afraid to tell their boss about something. And literally it can go find it, no matter all the different ways you can do it. I have one demo we do where we say, I gave it 400 of President Obama's speeches. Does Obama make a joke in the speech? And it can come back and find all these different things. And it says, here it's a lighthearted comment about being late for dinner, right? It's able to actually and this is the kind of thing that just doing that with an earlier system was laughable, right? You just could not do it. Okay, so far so good? So if used correctly, and that's a big if, there's already, and I'm not speculating at this point, this is in the hands of attorneys. Some law firms are in various stages of evaluating it. We had the privilege of getting GPT-4 very early, so we were able to kind of build out a product. And I can tell you now, it is now part of, at least for some group of attorneys, part of what they're practicing. So it's not speculative. It's not, one day in the future maybe AI will have a role. It has a role right now if you use it well. That said, all of this noise about, it's going to replace lawyers, I think it's just hype. I think, that stuff is clickbait. It's easy. But I do think it might transform what it means to be a lawyer and the place of lawyers in society. And in thinking on that, I remembered a book I read a long time ago. This is Anthony Kronman, who was the dean of Yale Law School. And in this book, The Lost Lawyer, he laments how legal professionals have sort of fallen from a place when they were sort of like statesmen, when they would have one client that they would tend to advise through ups and downs and sort of be wise about long-term strategy, where they weren't simply a billable hour, right? And they weren't necessarily working 90-hour weeks. Granted, probably 70, but not 90, which then gave them time to kind of learn about other things in other society. And he basically says this has been replaced, this noble thing, and I know lawyers have always had a rap, but don't get me wrong, but has degraded into this, I think he calls it a hyper-mechanic. And I think what you see now with these structures of these firms is that there's a lot of money to be made in billing out young attorneys to do certain tasks, certain rote tasks. And I wonder, one way the law might change, and this could be, I'm just being very optimistic here, is that once freed from that stultifying labor, as Isaac Asimov said, and once you can no longer bill for that stultifying labor, you sort of have no choice but to return to your former self. And I think that might be a good thing. I think if we could remove from law both the profit incentive for grudge work, and then also frankly the need for it, and free up our mind, we could find ourselves in a better place. There are certainly those who argue the other side as well. Okay, so we're going increasingly outside of an area where I'm any particularly well suited to talk, if that makes sense. So I don't want to mistake. I'm really into applying this stuff in the practice of law. You guys know much better than I the aspects of education on this. So please take everything I'm saying here with that multiple grains of salt. But what I've heard from the beginning with law firms that we've talked to is this fear, Pablo, we get rid of the grudge work, but that's education. They learn from doing that. All right, next movie clip.
Now ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yes. Let's make sacred pact.
It is kind of funny imagining a
promise
managing partner and then the associate having this
karate.
conversation.
That's my part. You promise learn. I say you do. No question. That's your part. Deal?
Steel?
Yes. First wash all the car, then wax. Wax.
Why do I have to watch all the car?
Remember deal. No question.
Yeah, but
Right. Wax on, right hand. Wax off, left hand. Wax on, wax off.
Okay. The idea being that it might just seem like grunt work, but that is karate after all. That wax on is how you block. It might just seem like 4 months of doc review, but that young man and young lady is learning to be an attorney in that task. What do you guys think of that? I really mean it. I'm torn a little bit. I mean, I definitely, I came out of law school, I didn't know much about how corporations worked. I didn't have any family in corporations. So reading all those emails, including the irrelevant ones, was sort of like an education of sorts of different things on that. But, one wonders, could there be more efficient ways maybe of teaching this stuff? But one sort of thing on this is really this sense of that grunt work is part of an attorney's development. And so at a minimum, we need to think, how will we ensure that this attorney does learn the things that they might have learned that way, right? I think that'll be one of our challenges. And this next slide, I think this is on purpose as a blank page. Let me see. Oh yeah, okay. So now I want to talk about something, and this is, I guess I should say, I don't necessarily speak for Casetext. It's a small enough company that if you really don't like what I say, you can take it out on Casetext. It's probably fair. But to me, one of the most dangerous aspects of this new AI, respectfully, John, is exactly what just happened to me, which is the blank page is so brutal. And it's so hard to go from blank to something, right? You have to choose so many things. What tone are you going to use? And now you're sacrifice all the other tones. Who's your audience? And now the rest of the audience you don't care about or something like that. It's so difficult to go from nothing to something. But I submit to you guys, it's actually a really, really important part of what it means to develop thinking and sort of being, if that makes sense. And this is actually somebody you might not suspect to be sort of in this vein. Paul Graham is was the founder of Y Combinator, which is sort of like this incubator. They're like kind of the, Casetext is one of them that turn these things out. He's now living in the countryside of England, just penning long form essays. And he says here, and I'll just kind of summarize a little bit, but basically, people are going to start using ChatGPT to write. And that's really bad, because when you lose the ability to write, you lose some of your ability to think. And then he says, I wish I could change this, but people are lazy, and this is what's going to happen. I actually think this is a real problem. I think wrestling with a blank page is a really, really important thing to do. And in fact, I'm willing to go this nuts with my metaphor of it. Anybody recognize this scene from Delacroix? What's that? Jacob wrestling the angel. And I wanted to talk about just this analogy, right? Because this like pain that you go through and the suffering to kind of then become things. I was fumbling with the words, so then I used ChatGPT-4 to try to write it. And it wrote this really good essay about it. Like, damn it, I'm not going to use it. Right? So I guess my point, here is that, like, with education, I do think that of all the, saying no pain, no gain kind of thing, I think that wrestling a blank page is one of the most important pains that we can go through. And I think taking that away, I really worry about what we look like as a society where, even our folks who have had the benefit of the best education really don't have to ever do that. I think editing the adverbs that ChatGPT chooses, like you could tell yourself, oh, we're working together. It'll output it, and then I'll just kind of tidy it up a little. I just don't think it's the same. So I think that's really something to keep on. And then I think we have a session later today where I'd love to talk to you guys more about some of the educational aspects of it. Again, you guys will know much more than I the factors that go into this. But suffice it to say that even at the law firms now, they're worried about kind of evolving their associates, and I think it's a more powerful challenge for us in law schools, kind of going. All right, so while we're on topics that I'm not particularly expert to talk about, but here we are, and you guys are a captive audience here, is sentience. So some of this, you've seen some of these things about like, is it real? Like, is this thing actually have a soul, things like that? And so just a couple thoughts on that. So there's actually a museum in Japan for rocks that look like they have faces. And you just need to understand, it doesn't have a face. You're bringing the face. You got the face. You're seeing the face. There's another version of this. Sorry to get religious, but the Virgin Mary is down in the room. Right? There's some moments where you bring things and you see it there. But to my mind, the best maybe analogy that I can think of for this stuff is, and it's funny, does anyone still have their yellow paper? Because if you brought it up and I folded it into a swan in front of everybody, I took that paper and I made a swan, and then I did that thing where the wings move, and somebody yells out, "It's a real swan!" You'd be like, but it's not. You just, right? Is that thing flapping its wings? Is it flapping its wings? I don't, right? It's not, but it's not, to my mind, this is basically what we've done. We took everything ever written and folded it on itself to make this neat little thing that if you move it like that, it can do something that seems very much like it's flying or flapping its wings, but of course it's right? And so I guess what I'm very much of the view of like, no, it's not sentient, it's ridiculous, it's just as dumb as origami. Right? But the one thing, and the weird image I'm going to leave you guys with, the one thing where it gets hard is then you say, well, what are we? Right? And you got to go all the way back to the beginning with them. These are called white smokers. These are the ocean vents where it all got started. And here's a book by Nick Lane called The Vital Question. He's a biochemist at Oxford, right? Basically, slowly, these little crevices, they started to form a proton gradient where suddenly things were on one side or the other, and then suddenly that allowed for a cell wall, and then suddenly da-da-da. Essentially, a bunch of inanimate stuff started folding on itself. And look at us now, right? And so the one wrinkle with that, right, is that if you really push them to solve our own system, they're also, material unless you allow for sort of, divine sparks and stuff like that. So anyway, believe me, I'm aware of how far from any answer what I just did there was, but I guess it's more trying to frame at least the two sides as I'm seeing it, right? And this is, I think, really going to be a theme, which is, I think right now we have a lot more questions than answers. I think we all see that this now enables the next decade has so much promise, but also so many pitfalls that could happen, right? I think this is a time where we're really going to get to see, and frankly, the folks in this room help decide and choose what is it going to look like, right? And All I can say is that from my viewpoint, having worked using earlier tools and techniques, the ability of this stuff to increase the practice of law, both the quality and the efficiency, is unparalleled. But as you've seen from already a number of the public disasters and from other stuff as well, there's also a lot of danger if it's being misused. And I'm not even getting into things like how expensive it is right now. It breaks my heart that I can't tell all of you you can go log on and use our GPT-4 system right now. Casetext has always been free for all schools. We can't do it because it's too expensive, and also the servers keep getting overloaded. Paul Lomeo, the director at Stanford Law School, told me that there was a time where Stanford law students were not allowed to use Westlaw between certain hours because that was New York time, damn it. And like they can't have both Stanford and New Yorker. And strangely, we're sort of back into that place, right? They're working to build these specialized chips, but there's just not enough of them. And so we're in this thing where, like, you know, in the beginning of electricity, only Wall Street and Madison Avenue had street lamps. And while we have been giving it to nonprofits and doing things like that, I'll be real, we're doing that in part because it's driven by branding and marketing. We can say, look, it's worth it because, look, this is the good fight. This is why people work at Casetext. And it's real. I'm not saying it's just marketing, right? But it's not done on sort of an economics basis, if that makes sense. We've got it down for solos, I think, to $6,000 a year, which not, for some attorneys that's doable, for some it's not. And so one of the things I think we need to really push for is to see how can we ensure that these benefits are not just realized at the top. This is, well-known stuff. This is not, new to AI. But again, probably exacerbated. Okay, so in sum, guys, yes, I'm here to report that, yes, the hype, let me see, much of the hype is legitimate. Does that make sense? It's not thinking, it's not sentient, it's not a robot lawyer. It is going to profoundly improve, if used well, the practice of law, and I would include access to justice on that. And I would submit to you guys here, as we start on this, the challenge for us now is how do we navigate these questions using both values and tensions that we're well aware of from earlier technology, while also sort of adapting to the things that are new about this technology. And so thank you so much. It's a privilege to get to talk to you guys about this today. Questions, comments, concerns? Please. Yeah, okay, we're not going to go down that path. Yeah. Sentience should be like a whole panel, right, and the whole thing like that. Yeah. Please, go ahead. That's my fault. I pointed to 4 people. You go first.
You talked about the law lawyer and that idea that the more this eliminates some of the drudge work and gives us the ability to be the elder statesman and go back. What do you think of the chances of that versus instead a situation where the partners, the equity holders, are just eliminating lower level positions and just further stratifying the people at the top and freeing up their time and because we talk about you take away the profit motive for drudge work versus the idea that you're really just going to allow capital to eliminate labor.
I'm sorry, the last part.
Enabling capital to eliminate labor at that point where the partners can just fire half their associates because this tech is going to do the work and maybe it's freeing up time for them,
right.
But it's not freeing up time for the average associate to focus on that personal and professional development.
Right. So it's a world where there's a lot less lawyers, and the ones that are left get to be statesmen. That's great, but I think that's an issue. I'm not, the full replacing, I think is just, in law, I just don't see it immediately. My wife's a screenwriter, and they're all on strike right now. Being a writer is basically going from being unemployed to being on strike about being unemployed. But anyway, so, and one of the things they're saying is, we don't want you to use AI. We don't want you to use AI to create scripts. And I think that, I'd like to think, no, the human stuff will be so much better, right? And then you see like the Transformer movies or whatever, and you're like, no. Don't watch a lot of stuff. I feel like I'm evading a little bit your question. Our position is that I believe, like, if you're using your associates, you can put them on higher value stuff. And we say that. And some managing partners are like, yeah, sure, buddy, sure, we're just not going to hire them. Right? So that is a threat, I think. But law, it's weird, we don't exist for ourselves. We're a profession. We're supposed to be happy when they don't need us. Right? And I think that that's a different pressure for us. A lawyer who's sad that their client doesn't have to call them and pay them $300 to go answer a basic question, right, isn't really living up to his duty as a lawyer, right? You should be happy about that because that's better serving your client. And so I think I've evaded your question so many different ways that it's should be continued. All right, in the back, please.
Across the threshold went from being sort of, as you said before, not that interesting to really actually quite interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder, is that a plateau sometime right now? Or are you just still finding things great now?
Yeah.
And the next thing comes along, we'll make that look like nothing.
So this is a huge debate in the area. How much will scaling up matter? And, folks, that was the debate about GPT-4, right? People were wondering, like, how good will it be relative to 3? And I think everyone was amazed. Scaling up really did seem to add all these systems. There's some theories that as you get bigger, the language models are creating little language models inside themselves that are being used through tasks, which is like something that might explain these emergent abilities. I think the answer is it's not clear. I think OpenAI is claiming that maybe now it's not about just scaling up more and more, but maybe they're saying that because of all the stuff around, all the kind of fears and stuff like that. But I think the short answer is we don't really know what's going to happen if you scale up even larger. But we'll find out soon, I think. People are... Oh, 100%.
Is there a quality that you're expecting or wondering will happen? Like, all of a sudden, it's more alive or not sentient?
All right, so like it stops its own training and goes to Wikipedia and creates Alpha sapiens as a species, right? And you're like, wait a minute. It's a great question. I just, what would you look for? I mean, there are some folks that are warning if you see sudden drops and sudden huge jumps in its performance, that might indicate that it's somehow now finding its own training or something like that. But I don't have any one litmus test for it.
So you talked about the two-step process. Steve Wolfram from Wolfram Modeling talked about a pre-LLM that does fact-checking and comes up with computationally correct answers before it then uses a large language model. Can you talk about combining different models to get accuracy?
So I think that sort of blending, I think, is definitely going to be a place where you can do a lot. I think that knowledge graphs and other systems and things that we've built, including some of those old school symbolic logic systems, do sort of have a seat in Valhalla, if that makes sense, right? I think there is a role for them. I think LLMs are actually making it easier to set some of that stuff up, sort of so there's a sort of feedback system. And I know even things like that, the one where it says, I want pie, and it tells them I was thinking, there's some work now where you're gonna, instead of training the model and then teaching it to unlearn, right? You actually fold that into the beginning, that training process. So it's guess the next word, but also comport with these things. So I think you're going to see a lot of that sort of blending, I think, and well, you should.
How is applying AI to your own data will fix the hallucination problem?
Right, so you have to, you anchor it and you say only base your answer on the material that's returned to you. Do not freestyle anything. And so for us, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. That's a disaster. If it says something that's true. The first time we had it, I asked it to make a timeline. I fed it the transcripts of Vanessa Bryant, the widow of Kobe Bryant, the hospital, the helicopter tragedy. And it outputted the timeline. I was like, this timeline is amazing. And then I started to be like, wait, some of this stuff is not in the transcript, right? It just remembered from its training some of the news, or was just fabricating it, right? So that's very bad. Even if it was true, it's bad because it wasn't in the transcript. Lawyers need to have things, to doc. And so one of our proudest moments was when they fed a contract and it said, I don't know what industry Coca-Cola is. And we were so proud of it. We're that's damn right you don't, because that's not in this document. Right? And so sometimes it being dumb is yes, it's working, right, if that makes sense. So it really just has to do with the prompting and how you set up the engineering. And then we layer over some algorithms that kind of police, that look for things that aren't there. to be honest, it's mostly cosmetic right now. They're not really finding anything, but that's how we do that.
Asked it, what are the facts of this case? It's not a real citation. If it has this desire to transfer that, if you ask a less open-ended question, is it less inclined? Like you had said, is this citation a real court case? Is it still inclined to try to pull stuff together to make it a court case? Or is it more likely to say, I don't have a record? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do think depending on the, because think about just in a vacuum, if I say, is this case real? Now it's much more probable that somebody might say no, I guess, right? Relatively speaking. When I first started using it, I asked it about a case I worked on. And its answer was so good that I was second guessing myself about a case I worked on. And I was like, God, did we argue that? I don't think, but man. And I said, you're wrong. I argued this case. And I kid you not, it said, Pablo, you can sit there and brag about the cases you worked on if you want, but I'm right. And here's proof. And then it had a URL to nowhere. I say this affectionately, left to their own devices, they're little sociopaths. I'm sorry. But you know why now. It's not that it's mean, it's just that it's trying to guess what comes next. And I guess, that. So, but yeah, so depending on the prompt, it could happen. But you just can't mess around with hallucinations. Like, you really need to use a retrieval augmented generation system because, it just you can't do it the other way right now. Maybe that will change one day, but right now you can't.
Very good.
Thank you guys so much.